to wrap up this text as image exercise, I wanted to go over exporting, and I also wanted to show people a couple more additional options for working with this project. I know it's definitely a more challenging project because we do have these restrictions in place where you're not able to create any image elements other than text objects. You're not able to really work with a lot of different fonts. You're tied to one font, maybe one color, and make sure that you're reviewing the project requirements in Canvas to make sure that you have each of those requirements met before submitting this. But I do want people to be able to work in this more refined manner because I think that there's still a lot of opportunity to create a complex visual image even when you're working with more basic transformations. So I wanted to quickly walk through just some of the things that I did with my image, and maybe this can help people with some ideas. So I was working with the literal meaning where I was trying to represent or visually represent the literal meaning a little bit with the way that the words were fit and laid out on the page. So I have this, the sentence was, people are trapped in history and history is trapped in them. So I'm working with all this overlap and this idea of confinement to create this visual sense of being trapped or being restricted to a specific area. So I did that just with working with scale. So I have this very large letter and then very small type on top of that letter in that contrasting white color so that it's popping out. So it's looking like it's contained within this letter, but you see outside of the artboard, I have this overlap happening where it's extending out, and I don't even have this really contained in the shape. I'm just using that white and black contrast in the different arrangement. So where the order of these two different text objects are in the layer to create this effect. And then I also have this word, his history is trapped within the P of people, and the history part is barely legible, and that's okay. And I'm working with multiple versions of one layer that I've copied and pasted, and so I duplicated this many, many times. And these are things that, the same way that you can duplicate shapes by holding down Option, when you have the select tool selecting the object and dragging, you can do that with text as well. So that can be a really quick way to create multiples of the same text object. I'm also working with the position of different words. I'm alternating between scale in the words that are more legible. I'm using scale to define the way that people might read through this. So for instance, we have the smaller text here, people are trapped in history, and history is trapped in them over and over again. But then I'm also wanting people to pull back and then maybe read that one sentence a little bit more from a different level potentially. And so that's why I have this people are trapped in history. I have this in white, and it is mostly the same scale so that people, the viewer can watch this, or not watch this, can view this and start to investigate these different layers and levels of meaning and understanding. And one way that I'm helping people guide through these different levels is by using scale. I've spelled out people here. I've used scale to slowly shrink down people, and then I've also been using basic rotations and changing the position so it looks as though it's almost falling. And then I have, this is actually a very large L, and so then I put down, I put history within that L, again reinforcing this idea of confinement and being trapped, and trying to show this visually in several different ways throughout this entire piece. So those are some of my ideas that I worked with for this. And I also want to show in the layers, I started working with a lot of layers because once you start locking layers, it makes it easier to select these different text objects. You might notice that when you're selecting text objects, you're dealing with like the bounding box doesn't totally fit around those objects. And that's because the text objects, they're keeping into account the size of the ascenders of capital letters and then also the descenders. And so you get this expanded bounding box. So it can be a little bit harder to select things. So working with layers really helps, especially when, as I did in this example, you're working with a lot of overlays and multiple objects being directly on top of one another. So it can really help to be able to lock those, and then that way, when you have all the layers locked except for one, when you hit Command A, it only selects the objects on that one unlocked layer. So you're able to change things around a little bit more easily and navigate your project a little bit more easily using layers. Okay, so I now am ready to export this, and I'm going to save this as well. So I'm saving, make sure that you're saving this as an Illustrator file. You don't want to just export it as a JPEG and then trash your Illustrator file, because you'll never be able to get any of these vectors back. And when you're exporting as a JPEG, remember you're changing this to a pixel image just so that we can upload it to Canvas and view it in Canvas. You don't want to then reopen that JPEG to make changes to it, because it's just not going to work. This is a vector file, and that's what you want to be working in, and you're only exporting to a JPEG to a pixel-based image at the last minute once you're done with your pieces. So to do this, I'm going to go up to File, I'm going to go to Export, I'm going to go to Export As. And remember, if you are working in CS6 or below, you need to go to File, Save for Web, and that will be under the saved area. It will not be under export. But since I'm in CC versions, I'm going to export as, and I have this. I'm going to say text as image. I see that right now my default is making it save as a .png file, and I don't want that. So I'm going to go down to Format. I'm going to change it to JPEG. I'm going to make sure to check Use Artboards, and then I'm going to go to Export, and then I'm going to get this dialog box that gives me some more options. And what I'm going to say here is I'm going to change this to RGB, and that's just because once in a while JPEGs, when they're in CMYK format, can do a little bit weird things when they're in a web browser. I doubt it will make a difference for these files, so don't worry if you accidentally selected CMYK for this. So RGB 10, and because this is for screens, because you're just uploading this to Canvas, then we're going to be viewing it on a web browser. You just want to make sure that it is set to 72 ppi. And it doesn't really matter if you've been working with pixels as your unit of measure, but if you have been working with inches, then yeah, you do want to keep that at 72 ppi for this project. And then this is fine. I've had some questions about the difference between baseline optimized, progressive. Just go with the standard, but even if you do select one of these other ones, it is probably not going to make that big of a difference. So I'm going to hit OK. And now that has saved in that folder. I'm going to, so now I'm going to open up that folder and look at this. And I'm just opening this in Illustrator to show people. I have my JPEG here, and looking at the layers, you see there are normal layers. I can't go in and edit this. This is just a pixel-based image. So this is not ideal to be trying to edit to further work with this project, but it is the ideal file format that you want to upload to Canvas.